Friday. We have an interview with George Hasten. The group is for our technology report on transportation. The interviewers are Jamie Owen and Holly Brown. Some of the questions that we have is how fast did the first trains go? Do you know that?
Oh, I don't know if I ever run across. It depends on how far back you're talking.
Yeah. Like, let's see. I said the 1980s or 1918. Forgot that time.
1918, okay. Let me think. I can recall it. I haven't thought about it for a long time. When President McKinley was shot, he shot out of Buffalo, New York. They sent a special train from New York with some doctors to Buffalo. And that train set a speed record that stood for years. I mean, clear up until probably stood for 40 years. And that hit speeds of 115 miles an hour. Yeah. But, I mean, this is an exception,
yeah.
You know, but they were possible. Speeds like that was possible. Of course, most of your trains didn't run that fast.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I wouldn't even hazard a guess, really.
I think they started out like 20 miles an hour and stuff
Oh,
like that.
back in the beginning, yeah, they just
Plodded along.
Yeah. At one time, in the early days of railroads, they thought that if you went above, I don't recall the exact figure, but say like 30 miles an hour, it took your breath away and you couldn't breathe. Things like that.
Did earlier trains need a lot of fuel for like getting from place to place?
Well, the early trains burnt wood.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many miles it would go between having to stop for fuel. Now, in later years, it got to where the fuel wasn't the problem, it was the water. See, the water is lost. I mean, it goes up the stack and it's lost. The water's lost, so they have to replenish the water every so often. Ships and things like that condense it and reuse it. So, trains, say in the 1930s, the limiting thing was the water. And the Pennsylvania Railroad, I don't recall just where it was, but they had a trough built between the tracks. And they would drop a scoop down. And the forward motion of the train would throw the water up into the tender in the water tank, basically. And they didn't have to stop.
Okay.
And I did know at one time where this was, and it seemed to me like it was 2-3 miles long, this scoop. And they had some fast passenger trains, see, and they
just had to keep going.
Yeah.
That's neat. What were some of the things that trains hauled besides, passengers and?
Well, back before the era of the automobile, everything was hauled on the train. You know, every kind of a product, freight of all kinds. You order a cook stove from Chicago and it came on the train. And see, when I was a boy in the 30s, both railroads, the Conrail now was the Pennsylvania then, and the Big Four that ran north and south through town, they had a freight house. And they had a train they called a local. And that's just what it was. It would stop at every town, and it carried this freight. Like I say, if you ordered a cook stove from Sears and Roebuck in Chicago, they would come on the train, and they would stop and they would unload their stuff in the freight house. And then people would call for it and pick it up. So everything before there were trucks, I mean, obviously it either moved by wagon or train. In the early days, you ought to see some maps of say, Illinois in the early days of railroads. Almost every town was on a railroad. I mean, the first time you look at a map like that, you think you're looking at a road map of today. They go everywhere. And so everybody, you ordered something, it would come into your local station.
What were, like, the general type of train when you were a kid?
Well, do you know where I live?
I think.
On Road 1800?
Yeah.
Well, we moved there in 1935, and I would have been 11 years old, I guess, around there. The big four that ran up and down there, my wife and I live there in the same place now, and 3 acres went back to the railroad right away. Mm-hmm. So I spent a lot of time when I was a boy looking at trains and things like that. And of course that was predominantly a coal. It hauled coal from southern Illinois. There was a lot of coal mines in southern Illinois, and a lot of it went to Chicago up that route. Most of the trains was nothing but coal cars. Now, the Pennsylvania, they would have hauled, merchandise. They had tank cars that they hauled oil and gasoline, just like they do today.
The stops along the Marshall area and Martinsville and Casey, what were the main hubs for there? Where did they stop, like, most frequently and stuff like that?
When the train come into town?
Yeah.
Well, there'd be a depot. Mm-hmm. And the depot for the Pennsylvania was out where the Clarksville Road crosses the Conrail out here.
Yeah.
It was on this side of the tracks to the right. And if you were going to ride the train somewhere, why, you went there and the train stopped and you got on. And the one, when I was a boy on the Big Four, was down where the building supply is, on the north side of Archer, Stevens, or whatever they call it.
Yeah.
The depot was there. Now, you read that, and I talk about when the track came through town, and of course the depot was somewhere else. And of course, I'm not that familiar with Martinsville and Casey, but they had a depot. Yeah. Just like Evertown had a depot.
Did do you know when the first trains came to Marshall?
I'd have to refer to this.
All your knowledge is in the papers.
Okay. I know there was a train through here in 1880, and it came down Route 1, where Route 1 is. I should know. Railroads were built in sections. I mean, a railroad, well, for instance here, there's a railroad built between Terre Haute and Indianapolis, 73 miles. That was it. That was the Terre Haute Indianapolis Railroad. Well, then there was a Indianapolis to Richmond, Indiana, over on the east, pretty well on the border. That was a railroad. Then, if you lived here at Marshall at that time, to ride the train, you had to get to Terre Haute to get on it. There was no train from here through. And I thought I had this on here. Okay. The North and South Railroad, what I always call a Big Four, and everybody else did, it was actually I have a little trouble keeping these lined out. Well, there was four big cities it went to. Chicago, Cleveland, Cincinnati, and St. Louis. And this is where, that's what it was officially called.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody called it the Big Four because that was four big cities.
Yeah.
Okay? And there's a story that in a brokerage firm where they sell stock. And of course back then everything was written on a blackboard. You didn't have screens and all this sort of stuff like they do today. And this clerk got tired of writing Chicago, Cleveland, Cincinnati, and St. Louis, and he just wrote Big Four. And the story is that's how it got its nickname. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but I did read it in some of my research. But you're doing this research, I would suggest go down to the library, go in the old section on the west.
Yeah.
I think it's on the south wall. There's some pictures there. And there's a picture of a drawing of Marshall, and I think it's 1880. Somewhere in here I said this. It's a pencil drawing, and it's kind of like a bird's eye view. You're kind of looking down at the town.
Uh-huh.
And it shows where the track goes through town. On Route 1. And there's one train drawn on the track coming from the south that I think the engine's about St. Mary's Church. And then there's one coming in from the north that's about Spruce Street. What would be Spruce Street? I don't think Spruce Street was on the drawing, but about there. And that is dated 1880. It'd be worth your while to go and look at that picture. The streets are named, and they're named entirely different than what they are now. And naturally, what we call Archer was called Cumberland then, because Cumberland Road, the national road. And of course, Archer was changed from Cumberland to Main Street sometime down the line. When I was a boy, it was Main Street. Archer was called Main. Mm-hmm. And in 1935, when they had their centennial, they changed it to Archer Avenue. That's when it made the change there. Mm-hmm. But this, maybe I'm getting off the subject here, I don't know.
That's okay.
But it depends on how long your tape is.
We got one. Just go ahead. Do you know a lot about some of the automobiles that were around here? Because we have all kinds of transportation that we're doing too.
You mean the early? Some of the early models? Is that what you're talking about?
Just generally anything.
Gee.
Because we tried to find, like, when the first cars came to Marshall, but we couldn't, none of the newspapers or the microfilm that we looked at that had the newspapers on went back that far. Or anything like that.
I can remember my mother telling me the first automobile she saw. She was born in 1899. So, how old she was, I don't know. But say probably the time she was 8 or 10 years old, probably. They'd have been automobiles.
You guys moved here in 30... You moved here in 35?
Yeah.
Where'd you live before that?
Well, I was born in Melrose. You know where that White Pleasant Road is.
Yeah.
And we lived up by McKean a year. And I'll leave this copy with you. And I talk about living up there in this. I don't know whether you want it all on tape or not, but I'll leave this with you.
We'll take anything.
Okay. But, of course, you've got the cars that's in production today, like the Fords and General Motor products. And, Ozzy boy, you had the Studebaker. You've surely heard of Studebaker. Yeah. People back then said, yeah, they made a good wagon. They originally built wagons. The Studebaker people built wagons. They built wagons for use in the Civil War. But anyway, there were Studebakers and Hudsons, which evolved into American Motors, which is now defunct. And gosh, I don't know. And that's all I'm thinking of offhand, to tell you the truth. Some models go back before my time. There's been a lot of cars built in the United States. It's amazing when you see the figure. But in the early days of automobile, they might last for a year. Some guy decided he's going to have an automobile factory, so he started building automobiles, and it didn't go, see. And he went out of business. Somebody else had tried. So there's a lot of that in the early days.
Do you know how popular Model A's and Model T's,
oh yeah,
cars like that were?
T's first vehicle I ever drove.
My grandpa has one.
Yeah. And, oh yeah, they, boy, there's quite a few of them in everyday use. And Model A's, there was a lot of those.
How long do they usually last? Like, cars today, they last pretty long.
Well, of course, people didn't put as many miles on a car back then as they do now. I mean, you didn't jump in a car and go to Terre Haute to eat supper. You know, you didn't go to Terre Haute unless you really had something you wanted to do over at Terre Haute, needed to do. And it's probably hard for people your age to understand that, but you just didn't jump in the car just on a whim. You know, you just didn't do it. But people have a car for several years and wouldn't really put a lot of miles on it because they didn't use it that much. However, cars today last longer. They're mechanically better built. Their tolerances in the engine and stuff are better and all this, and they just naturally last longer. Besides, a car that's used a lot, you can put more miles on it than a car that's used infrequently. It's not good for a car to just drive it short distances.
Yeah, we rack up like 300 miles a week.
Yeah. Well, I worked construction before I retired, and I worked a lot in Tuscola. And of course, back then, cars, you're supposed to change oil every 1,000 miles. It seemed like every time I turned around, I was changing oil. You know, because it really added up. 65 miles, and then a round trip, 130. But I don't remember much about cars, before we moved here. I was out in the country most of the time.
What were some of the items that the trains hauled?
Oh, where you go now?
Well, like I said, in the early days, before there was cars and trucks, you had two ways to haul something. You hauled it in a wagon, or you hauled it on a train. And
was it mostly like the stove or whatever you said, or foods like they do now? Because I read that in here, ice down fruit.
Well, I was talking about 1933 in this ice down fruit. The fruit trains that went through on the Pennsylvania from California. Of course, by then there was quite a bit of stuff went on trucks by then, but
Yeah.
farther back, that well, the turn of the century, like I say, you either hauled it in a wagon, or if you ordered something from 100 mile away, why it'd come in on a train. And food stuff, usually not perishable. There wasn't that much perishable stuff way back in the turn of the century. People didn't have refrigeration.
Yeah, had those blocks of ice.
Yeah,
and stuff.
women in a big city, women had to shop every day. They'd go to the meat market, they'd go this, go that.
No, is it, they just use the one day of food instead of having a week's worth
Yeah,
of?
yeah, because, like I said, they didn't have refrigeration. Then, I don't know when ice boxes come along and the man come around. If you needed ice, you had a card. Now, this is getting off subject, but anyway. Had a card about that big square. It said 25, 50, 75, 100. And you turn the number up of how much ice you wanted. And like, he'd drive up and he'd see it in the window, he'd know what to bring in. So, but it still didn't keep things like a modern refrigerator,
Although some people keep it just a little bit too long. Keep stuff in the refrigerator too long.
Well, when the moles start creeping out the door, that's time to clean it out.
When you were living here in Marshall, with the trains, did they derail very often?
No, I don't recall when I was a boy of a derailment anywhere around close. To tell you the truth, I think the tracks were better kept up back then than they are now.
Probably.
They don't use the manpower they did back then. Of course, they've got a lot of mechanical stuff now that they didn't have then. And you read this, you'll find out about the section gang. There was a section gang here at Marshall, and they were responsible for a certain mileage or section of track.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, there might have been 8 or 10 people in a section, maybe more. But they were responsible for maintaining the track. And that, the gang here might be responsible halfway to Paris and halfway to West Union, and Paris may have had one, and so forth. But it was all done by hand. There's very little mechanical stuff. Of course, today you've seen the big machines that do a lot of it, so they don't use enough manpower.
Yeah, I've got a cousin that works on the railroads and stuff.
Yeah. But, no, I don't recall a big train wreck of so-and-so. I just don't. Now, somewhere I've got a picture, and I got that from somebody else, that shows a train wreck. But that would have probably been back, who knows. I can't identify where it was actually at, but I'm sure it was locally, or the guy wouldn't have had the picture.
Yeah.
But, of course, there was some fantastic train wrecks that you read about in the history books and things like that. But, they didn't occur very often.
With regards to the types of trains, do you know, who made them, or what types they were? I know there was the steam engines, and then they progressed up to electricity and things like that.
Well, yeah, of course, that was your first
Mm-hmm.
locomotive, was steam or wood.
Mm-hmm.
There were several factories in the United States that built locomotives. Offhand, I can't name them all because I'm not that familiar with. But there was a company named Baldwin that built locomotives. That comes to mind. But there were several companies that built locomotives, and of course Pullman, he built the first sleeping cars. There wasn't a sleeping car until he come up with the sleeping car idea. About every railroad had their own yards maintenance, and they worked on their own locomotives and cars. They did the maintenance work themselves. There was car shops at Terre Haute, I remember, back in the 30s that did that. Centralia, Illinois had great, big, enormous repair facilities. Because I've read about, there was a big tornado in about 1919 or something. It's the longest track of a tornado in the state of Illinois. Well, yeah, track across the state of Illinois, but altogether, I guess it's the longest track they know of. It started in Missouri somewhere and came all the way across Illinois and ended up over about Princeton, Indiana, where it stopped. And the story I was reading about it, it came through Centralia. And these guys was working on a locomotive. Of course, it was cooled off. They, you know, they'd been there in the shop. And they jumped in the firebox to escape getting hurt in the tornado when it went through the building. Now, I'd be about as safe a place as you could be, I reckon.
Yeah.
But, now, this is not about tornadoes, so come up with another question, maybe we can stick on the subject.
In your papers here, you talked about your Amtrak ride and the Conrail, I think.
Well, Conrail is the road that goes through here now. That is Conrail. Yeah.
Did they, like on the sleeper ones where you take traveling trips on them, did they ever, like, compete with other companies to, like, get more business or anything?
Well, of course, there's not much competition now. Amtrak, if you want to go somewhere on a passenger train, it's almost Amtrak. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there was a time, say in the 20s, see, the Pennsylvania went through here on what Conrail is now. And there was an east and west railroad through Paris that was a New York Central. And they were competitive. I mean, their passenger business, they tried to have the fastest schedule and the placiest train and everything else to attract people because there was a lot of competition in the passenger service.
Do you know how much it costs to send things or to take a ride on train? Or does it all?
Well, I can tell you, last year going to New Orleans, I can tell you what it cost on Amtrak, but other than that, I couldn't. Then, you know, my ship had a reunion, had a 6th reunion in New Orleans. So, my wife and I had been talking about Amtrak, going somewhere on Amtrak. Never had. So we decided that was a good time. And you can get on Illinois Central over at Mattoon. That's where we got on. You can go to Mattoon or Effingham. That stops at Mattoon, stops at Effingham. And we had a bedroom. And I think altogether the round trip with the bedroom, and with the bedroom you got your meals. Your meals was included, and by the way, they had scrumptious meals on that train. I think it was around $440 for the round trip.
Per person?
For the pair of, for the two of us.
Say that's a lot of money.
Yeah, but you stop to think, you get in a car and you drive to New Orleans, or at least the way we do. We don't try to set any records. You'll stay on the road at least a night, maybe 2, depending on how everything works out. You got a motel. You got more meals on the road. So when you think about it, the main thing is you don't have to drive.
Yeah.
Especially into New Orleans. I wanted no part of that. That's a terrible town to drive in. I was looking at the map, and after we got there, I could see I was right. It's an old river town, and every street is one way, you know, and crooked, all that. And people down there, I never saw the light. They just walk across the street. You know, whether the light's red or green or in the middle of the street, they'd be a terrible wear and tear on your nerves to drive. You
Needs to be a pedestrian.
Afraid of hitting somebody, you know, and all that. I never saw the light. But anyway, that's the only thing I can tell you in the way of price. And I'd like to take that train and go to Seattle. I've been across the northern tier states on a train. My wife never has. I'd like to go out there sometime. You get on the train at Mattoon, and I understand that you never get off the car because the car's going on, clear on out there. Seattle.